So many things happened this week that I had to make a list. The Israeli Air Force carried out airstrikes on Doha, Qatar. The Russian Air Force invaded Poland's airspace with military drones. The government in Nepal collapsed with Capitol buildings burnt and government officials being beaten and houses being burned. There was a shooting near Battle Creek Central High School. There was a shooting at Evergreen High School outside of Denver. That makes 48 school shootings so far in 2025. And this is only the first day of week 38 of 2025. Charlie Kirk was assassinated at Utah Valley University. An Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo spreads to the Kasai province. And, of course, it was also the 24th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. That's a lot for 1 week. That's a lot for 1 week. And the interesting thing is that today we are celebrating the Feast of the Holy Cross. This feast is specifically intended to be about how the cross is good news for the whole world. Given the way the week has gone, it's reasonable to ask, how? How is the cross good news for the whole world? It's a reasonable question. And it's interesting because I found this week as I was doing some study, the New Testament professor Jennifer Bashaw of Campbell University in North Carolina, who shared, I think, some very powerful insights about the readings today. She noted that that little reading from John that we just heard connects the cross to the episode that we heard earlier from the book of Numbers. The episode where the people are being bitten by snakes and dying, and they ask Moses to pray to God to take the snakes away, and God tells Moses, make this serpent of bronze and put it up on a pole, and whenever the people are bitten, all they have to do is look at it, and they will be healed. And Professor Bashaw makes an interesting point, which is that in the story, the people have to look at an image of what's causing the problem. They look at an image of what's causing the problem. And as we think about it today, this makes all kinds of sense. Psychologically, for example, we assert that you have to make the unconscious conscious in order to work on it. So we have to make those unconscious patterns that are destructive in our life conscious so that we can address them, hopefully change them, and heal them. You have to see the thing in order to fix it. You have to know the thing in some way in order to fix it. And clinically speaking, it's important for medical folk to diagnose the illness so they can work on it. Again, you have to know the thing in order to be able to begin addressing it. So the assertion then is that in this little paragraph of John, out of which we pull John 3:16 and spout it about without thinking of the whole context, in this little text, the first part is Christ talking about when he is lifted up and the world looks up at him on the cross. And when we look at Christ on the cross, we see him dying because of human violence. We see him dying because of unjust social structures. We see him dying because of empire. We see him dying because of the human need to make scapegoats or someone to blame for all of our problems. We see him dying for all the ways in which we act out human brokenness. And then, says John, God gave his Son not to condemn the world, but that those who believe in him might be saved. And that believe word is a word that means trust and follow. So the idea there is, first off, just seeing the problem is a good thing. That's a good start. And then for us then to follow in his way is how we respond to seeing Christ so fully take on human life, even subject to the worst of our behaviors. It's a very interesting understanding. Looking at Christ in that sense is like looking at the serpent from the Numbers story. We look and we see the brokenness of the world. And then Paul tells us that this brokenness and our response to it, following Christ, is foolishness to the world, because Christ responds by self-offering. Christ responds by refusing to add more violence to the violence that already exists. Looking at him on the cross, we realize you can't fix violence in the world by being violent. That was the problem with so much of what happened this week. In many cases, it was people or nations trying to fix violence by being violent. It doesn't work. And so Christ's way of service and compassion and self-offering is a way that doesn't make sense to those who want to get theirs. But it does make sense when we look at the cross and realize that violence is the problem. And we can't fix violence with more violence. And I would suggest to you that looking at the cross all by itself and seeing the human problem there is good for the whole world, whether or not people believe in Christ as God's Son. It's interesting to me that Jesus is in the Quran and is honored in the Quran as a prophet. It is interesting to me that at many Hindu temples in this country, they celebrate a Christmas puja, Christmas worship. Those things are interesting to me because they say that Jesus does speak to the rest of the world. He does bring goodness to the rest of the world. He is good news. Even just seeing him on the cross and recognizing the problem of violence is a good for the whole world. Now today, in keeping with an old Syrian Orthodox tradition, at the end of the liturgy, we will process outside and we will face the 4 cardinal directions and say prayers for the whole world, no exception. And we do this in order to enact the meaning of this particular feast, that the whole world is blessed by the cross. The whole world is blessed by the cross. it's a good for the whole world. And it is important for us to show the world that we intend good for all, no exceptions. That intending good for all is an extension of Jesus' ministry of refusing to add violence to the violence that exists in the world, and choosing instead the path of self-offering, of compassion, of love. That's why we keep this feast. To remember that the faith we live is supposed to be good news for the whole world. Now, today, we are also acknowledging that Avery and Finley and Lucas are stepping out of childhood into adolescence. And that is a move towards adulthood, a transition. Adolescence is a transition between childhood and adulthood. And we want the three of you to know that you are God's, no matter what. No one can take that away from you. No one can diminish you in God's eyes. You are God's. And that will always, always, always be the case. And because you are God's, you can practice compassion and care and love in the world. You can have the courage to do those things. And you know, it's interesting to me, one of the things that's very interesting to me, and you three should take note of this, the Bible doesn't give us a lot of stories about Jesus' childhood, but it does give us a story about Jesus at age 12. I think that's really interesting. I think that's because it's an important time, an important transition. And in that story, Jesus hangs out at the temple having a religious discussion while his parents leave to go home, and he freaks them out. Now, we're not encouraging you to freak your parents out, okay? Don't do that, right? They're old, they need your help. Don't freak them out. But I think it's interesting because the Bible, the authors of the Bible didn't include stories of Jesus' childhood, but they felt it was important to include that story of being 12, that story of starting to really grow into your faith. And that's what we're praying about today. Because you becoming an adolescent is good news. And you are growing in the way of following Jesus, which is the way that refuses to try to fix violence with violence, but is instead the way of being caring and compassionate and kind. That's why we're praying for you today, because we know you're entering hard work, and we want to commit to supporting you in that hard work, because it is the work of Christ, and it is the work of being sure that all of us participate in making the cross good news for the whole world. That's what the Feast of Holy Cross is. Making the cross good news for the whole world.